Howdy everyone, I'm Jeffrey Snover. I'm a technical fellow and the architect of Azure Stack, and I'm joined by the famous Mark Arsenovich. He's famous for the Case of the Unexplained.
Thanks,
so he's
Jeffrey.
the Unexplained Technical Fellow,
Yeah,
and CTO of Azure.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And I see we're starting that way, huh?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Put your
All right.
seatbelts on. This is going to be fun. Okay, so we're going to talk to you today about digital transformation and Azure and Azure Stack and the role of these in digital transformation. You know, one of the things we used to say is the cloud changes everything. And while that's true, it's really a very technology-focused framing of the problem. And so I like the phrase digital transformation changes everything, because digital transformation is really a kind of customer-centric view of things. Okay, so that's how we're framing things. So the first thing to understand is that Azure Stack is new, right? This is not something, a projection of the past, right? And it's very difficult to sometimes get your head around new things, right? It's very easy to project your past into new things. So I started off learning Fortran, that's right, Fortran, and when the C came out, I started writing programs in C, but they were actually Fortran programs using the C compiler, right? So I had variables like I and J, and it took me a while, you know, maybe a few months before I got my head around, oh, this is how you write C programs. That was especially true when the C++ compiler came out. You know, it was probably, you know, better part of 6 months to a year that I was writing C programs using the C++ compiler until I finally just stopped, gave myself some breathing room, and kind of really fully embraced what this object orientation was, and then I started writing C++ programs.
I didn't know you ever programmed.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes,
There was something new every day.
There are pictures on the internet. So Azure Stack is something new, and you want to really stop and think about it. It's not, a lot of people think they know what Azure Stack is, and they don't. So hopefully you'll walk out clearly knowing what Azure Stack is.
So how many people have heard of this VMware on AWS thing? Raise your hands. So one of the things you'll hear as that's being marketed is that this is a hybrid play. And I'm here to tell you that it's actually not a hybrid play. It is a hosted virtualization play. It is a way to get your VMware estate up into a colo with AWS services nearby. That's pure and simply what it is, at least today. And that is maybe useful for some people that want to move their VMware estate close to AWS, but it's really, like I said, not a hybrid play, and it is not a move into the future. And that's what Azure Stack is all about, is future-proofing yourself on one hand. As you modernize, as you migrate to the cloud, Azure Stack, once you move on to that, is a place where you can then fully embrace cloud right in place, rather than having to then shift to someplace else. And when it comes to lifting and shifting, which is really kind of a VMware play, except you're lifting and shifting from one VMware stack to another VMware stack in a different place, Azure Stack, or Azure itself, supports a number of different technologies that allow you to lift and shift into the cloud itself. And that could mean into Azure Stack, it could mean into Azure. And we've got some announcements just we made yesterday on a new service. It's called Azure Migrate, which we announced as a preview service, that allows you to run a tool that will scan your environment, identify the virtual machines, the topologies that they consist of in their networking, as well as the dependencies between them, and then come up with a migration plan that includes those dependencies. So that is, if you're going to talk about lifting and shifting, the way to do it is to do it into a cloud environment. And in fact, many of the customers that I see do a lift and shift first and then modernize the applications after they're already moved.
Yeah, that's a totally legitimate pattern, design pattern, lift and shift and then modernize. But this really is all centered in taking you from where you are to the future, not taking you from where you are to where you are,
yeah.
using somebody else's concrete. I mean, literally, that's what it is. It's what you have today using somebody else's concrete. So we call that colo. We've had it for about 20 years. Let's be clear, there's benefits to colo. But it's colo and it's been around for 20 years. It is not hybrid cloud. Now, why do they project it as hybrid cloud? And the answer is because of Azure Stack. Azure Stack has really captivated people's imagination. And so we're going to tell you today what true hybrid cloud is all about.
And I just want to highlight a couple of the other migration technologies and licensing options that we've got here on this slide. One is the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, which lets you take your Windows Server licenses or SQL Server licenses and move them up into the public cloud. Another one's the Database Migration Service. So as you're modernizing and getting rid of your Oracle databases, you can move them onto SQL Server using this tool.
Great. So the key message that we wanted to land, and the reason why you have two technical fellows up here, is to really make this point absolutely clear. Azure Stack is not a thing of its own, right? Azure is the thing, okay? And Azure Stack is an extension of Azure to new customers and new scenarios. Okay, so it is a one single cloud platform that can be run in the public cloud, in service provider clouds, or in your data centers running on integrated systems. That is the value proposition. So the key thing, when we were doing Azure Stack, whenever a question came up, how were we going to do X? The answer was always, how does Azure do it? And can we do it the same way? And whenever possible, that was the answer. And it was only when that wasn't possible, and we'll talk about the cases where it wasn't possible, did we have to do something ourselves. So here's the right way to think about Azure Stack, what it is and what it is not. It is the first product of a new category. In fact, it is the only product of a new category called the hybrid cloud. At some point that might change, but in honesty, today it is the only product in this. This is not a virtual replacement play, right? So if you have virtualization and you like virtualization, that's great. We have great virtualization products, but that's not what this is, right? So virtualization, you get to go pick any hardware you want. You can configure it any way you want. You can put whatever agents you want on there. You spend all your time like soldering things together. You can have infinite control. And what do you do at the end? And the answer is you got a VM. And if that's what you want, we call that virtualization. It's a great model. Lots of people use it. That's our Windows Server and System Center thing. That's not what Azure Stack is. Azure Stack is a hybrid cloud platform. So what does that mean? It is an integrated system that comes and delivers self-service, IaaS, PaaS, and cloud solutions. What's a cloud solution? Go up to the Azure Gallery, Azure portal, look at the gallery. It goes and shows you all these pre-canned solutions that the community have provided. Sometimes we provided them. And you'll say, hey, I'd like to have an e-commerce solution. It'll show you 6 or 12 of them. You'll pick one and deploy it using ARM, and it'll stand it up. This is what we call a cloud solution. So it is a integrated system delivering self-service IaaS, PaaS, and cloud solutions. This is not a do-it-yourself infrastructure play. Again, if you just love going through hardware catalogs, this is not the play for you. What you're going to do is you're going to pick a vendor and you're going to pick a capacity. That's the deal. Okay? And this is a system that is regularly updated for Azure consistency. We will update the system on a monthly basis with patches and updates, and you will have the choice of when you get to apply these patches, but not if. You must be consistent with Azure. And I'll go over details as to why that is in the details of this plan. Concretely, this is not like your Windows 2003 server, something that you install, put it in a closet, and forget about. This is something that will be kept up to date on a maintenance, on a regular basis. And it is just like Azure. It is a truly open and flexible cloud. Look, the sea refuses no river. If you want to be using Windows, that's great. If you want to be using Linux, that's great. We're going to give you great solutions, whatever language, platform or tools you want to use. Okay? So this is not a .NET only or Windows only solution.
By the way, just out of curiosity, how many people came into this session thinking, oh, Azure Stack, that's great for Windows things versus great for Windows and Linux? Okay, so that's a misconception that we hopefully dispelled here.
Yeah. So I like to always ask, in the DevOps world, there's this phrase, 5 whys. Whenever something happens, ask why, and then ask why again, why again. And I love why because why is always the best explainer of things, and it's also the best predictor of things. Look, I'm going to give you a bunch of information today. Mark and I will give you a bunch of information. You'll remember some of that, and a bunch of that you'll forget. But if you understand our motivations and our thought processes, then you are better able to predict, given a set of situation, what is probably the case and also what will come next. So motivation's always the best predictor. So why are we taking this approach with Azure Stack? And the answer is that Azure enables digital transformation for customers, and that Azure Stack extends this to more customers and more scenarios. Okay? So again, it always centers in Azure. Okay? Azure's the thing that drives digital transformation, and then we make it available to more people and more scenarios using Azure Stack. Okay, anybody here heard of Moore's Law? Okay, good, good. Everybody's hand should have gone up. This has been the thing that has driven our industry. Moore's Law basically says that every 18 months the number of transistors will double. Amazing thing, amazing factor in our industry. I'm here today to tell you about the other's Moore's Law. And this is Geoffrey Moore. Geoffrey Moore wrote Crossing the Chasm. And I believe that this Moore's Law is perhaps more relevant and more important for our industry for the next 20 years than Moore's Law will be. Now, Geoffrey Moore basically has this idea of core and context. Core, and he says every business participates in these 2 types of activities, and only these 2. Core activities are those activities that differentiate you from your competitors by delivering unique customer value, which allows you to charge a premium. Context activities is everything else. Okay? So there's only 2 things. Things that help you compete and get more money, and then everything else. Now let me give you an example. At Microsoft, our core is software. So we scour the world for the world's best talent. We get that, and we put all of our energy there, right? That's why on stage you saw Fields Medal Award winners. I mean, we just have amazing people. Why? Because it helps us compete with other people. Context things are things like cafeterias, receptionists, and shuttles. These are important. We have to have these for our business to run. But for these things, we don't really want to pay attention to them, right? We want to write a check and then not pay attention. If I spent lots and lots of money on great cafeterias and had the world's best cafeterias by a factor of 10, you're not going to buy my stuff over our competitors because I have great cafeterias, right? That doesn't make any sense. So the model here is that there's also this other factor, mission critical versus enabling. Now the definition of mission critical is simple. Screw up, you're effed. You're in trouble. Bad things happen. You can't screw up, okay? And the observation here is this is where you want all your energy and focus to be, right? This is where Satya and his leadership, they spend all their time and energy, right? Satya and his leaders don't sit down and say, hey, what do you think we ought to put on the menu this week? Okay, that conversation doesn't happen. They spend all their energy here. Now here's the challenge. Notice that mission critical also exists for context. So how can that be? Okay, and here's the answer. At some point, you will have something in this space, mission critical core case, and you're rocking it. You're making lots of money, you got differentiated value add, and the marketplace is going to look at that and say, hey, I like some of that. And they will respond. And at some point, you will no longer be able to offer a premium for that set of functions. At this point, it becomes context. Okay? You used to be able to differentiate. The market responded. Now you can't differentiate. And here's where you get in trouble. Often the way you get to this core place is to go fast and you've incurred technical debt. Okay? So just because it's context doesn't mean that you don't have problems, that you don't have issues. So what people do is they continue to invest, and sometimes they increase their investment. At the same time, they're no longer able to charge a premium. This is a problem, right? This is the killing fields of once great companies. Jeffrey Moore talks about this company had this great product, they were no longer differentiated, they continued to invest and died, okay? And so what you need to do is to manage this area, you need to reduce the risk by reducing the complexity. How do you reduce the complexity? You standardize things. Instead of 5 ways to do things, you have 1 way to do it. Instead of 5 tools, you have 1 tool. Then you automate and outsource components. In these ways, you reduce the complexity of something. By reducing the complexity, you reduce the risk. And when you reduce the risk, you're able to take resources away from that and to invest them in core. So here, that's the heart of it, right? And so here is the heart or the strategy for digital transformation. What you want to do is you want to build the things that differentiate you. Focus all of your energy on that, right? And these are differentiated applications. And we're going to tell you how the Azure and Azure Stack allows you to focus all of your best people and all of your energy on differentiation versus just keeping the lights on. Number 2, you want to buy the things that don't differentiate you. And here we're talking about commodity workloads and infrastructure. And then lastly is you want to solve this mission-critical context thing. It's important, it's mission-critical, you can't screw it up, but you can't differentiate it. So how do you solve that? And I'm saying that you can solve that using Azure and Azure Stack, right? And the way you do that is by taking your stuff, lifting and shifting it, running it. You'll see Azure provides a ton of management capabilities, a ton of monitoring, a ton of security for free. This frees up bandwidth for you to then focus in so you can invest. So the heart of it here is that the cloud platform, the cloud API, the cloud services, the cloud operation model allows you to focus all of your energy on building the things that differentiate you, customer-focused applications. So if there's only one thing you remember out of this talk, I want you to remember this. Build the things that differentiate you, buy the things that don't, right? Let's get it really clear. Imagine you are in the airplane business. Does anybody here think you could put more people on an airplane by running Exchange better than anyone else? No, of course not, right? So for things, since it cannot differentiate you, you should just buy that. So SaaS is a critical component of this. Same thing, sneakers. You sell more sneakers because you can run SharePoint better than anyone else? No, so just buy that stuff. By buying that, that frees up people so that you can focus in on things. Next step, take it, lift and shift. Just by running existing workloads without changing them much, running them Azure, they get better, allow you to free up people to focus in on things. Automate some stuff, using PowerShell, of course, desired state configuration, frees up more people. Might even throw a little sysmon in there. Anyway, by automating things, you free up people. So the point isn't so much, hey, automate this, it's automated so that you can free up people, and then where you really want to focus is cloud native applications. And you'll see how using PaaS services, we do so much of that work for you, and you can focus in on the things that differentiate you.
So we're making 3 promises with Azure Stack, and we're going to spend some time talking about each of them. We're also going to highlight some examples where customers are taking advantage of these promises. Those promises, 1, consistent application development model. So you want to develop for Azure, the same development model applies to Azure Stack, and vice versa if you're going in the opposite direction. The second promise we've got is that we're going to take Azure services to on-prem. So this isn't just, as we said, an infrastructure virtualization play. This is a full IaaS plus PaaS platform. And we'll talk more a little bit later about what PaaS services exist in Azure Stack now at this GA time and which ones we see coming in the future. And then finally, it's an integrated experience. So basically you take Azure Stack and it comes as a fully managed set of resources that are basically Azure in a box, and Jeffrey will talk a little bit more about that later. Let's talk a little bit about what I view as the true value proposition of Azure Stack. Of course, consistent application model, being able to take an application and develop it for Azure and put it back on Azure Stack, for example, do dev test one place and production another, or take something and then move it to the public cloud after regulatory requirements are met in the public cloud. Those are great examples of the kind of consistency at the very low level. But really, when you get Azure Stack, you're getting the full Azure ecosystem. And that's something important to consider in light of other options you might be looking at, like your own private clouds that are built on OpenStack or some other solution that you're putting together. The fact is, when you develop a private cloud yourself, maybe even on OpenStack, you've got a bespoke private cloud. The SLAs offered, the services offered, the management experience are all different for your cloud from any other cloud. And this means that you've got internal training resources, you've got to bring people up to speed on how to develop for it and how to operate it. When you go to Azure Stack, now you're taking advantage of the Azure ecosystem, and you're taking advantage of people that know how to develop for Azure, as well as people that know how to manage Azure. So if you want somebody to manage your...
We have a term for that.
We have a... What is that?
Snowflake cloud.
Snowflake cloud.
You've heard of a Snowflake server, special little unique thing that's very fragile and melts easily. Well, often these private clouds are that. So first off, private clouds often fail. In fact, most of them fail. If you take a look, this is kind of well established. They fail.
How many people have OpenStack deployments at your company? How many of them are running well? Anybody had an OpenStack that's running well?
Okay, over there.
I think there's maybe one.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Whether it's OpenStack or other private clouds, most of them fail. For the OpenStack ones, you ask, hey, for the ones that do succeed, you ask the question, well, how many engineers do you have working on it? And you'll be amazed by the numbers. 40, 70, 80, 100 plus people working, just keeping the private cloud up and running. And the Turks have this great phrase. They say that when you find out you're on the wrong road, turn around, no matter how much progress you thought you were making. So at some point, these people have hundreds of engineers working on something that doesn't differentiate them at all from anyone. None of that work helps them, right? They have developers checking in code for open software-defined networking. Like, how's that put more people in an airplane? How's that sell more shoes, right? So this is just a wasted effort. Now the folks that use other bespoke clouds, when they get those things up, and again, one of the reasons why, I'm not trying to throw a rock at them, it is incredibly hard to get this stuff working. That's why it's incredibly valuable just to buy it, because someone else has done all the hard work. It's super hard to get these things working. The guys that have got it stood up, what they found is that it didn't deliver the value that they did because it's a bespoke cloud. Someone calls up in the middle of it, says, hey, how do I do something? And the answer is, oh, getting it working, that was the easy part. Now we got to document it, right? And documentation's really hard. Something happens in the middle of the night, who do they get help from? And the answer is, they call up you. Whereas with Azure and Azure Stack, we have a rich community of people, training, skills, events, etc., an ecosystem. I mean, that's what Microsoft does well. It's an ecosystem that people can draw upon.
And I'll talk more about another aspect of the ecosystem in the next slide, but one of the other differentiations of Azure Stack is that you're getting hyperscale public cloud on your own terms. And if you take a look at where Azure is, and as a hyperscale public cloud, we're in 42 regions around the world. If you take a look at the number of hosters that we expect to sign up to deliver managed Azure Stack experiences in places where Azure is not publicly operating or with meeting regulatory requirements that Azure does not currently meet, we expect that to be in the hundreds. Already seeing lots of interest. And then the number of enterprises that we expect to be deploying Azure Stack in the very near future, we expect that to be on the number of thousands.
You just keep talking. Yeah. I'll click the buttons for you.
Okay, thank you. We agreed you were going to click the button for me.
Okay. So you call it hyperscale? I like the term planetary scale. And the reason why I like that term is often, having worked with a lot of startups, and people will say, oh, I have this service, and they're running it on their own data centers, offering it to people, and guess what? They provide great service within a certain latency radius around their data centers. But then as they think, well, hey, this is fantastic, what about Asia? What about Europe, et cetera? And often they're like, oh man, I think we could really do well there, but standing up a data center in Asia, like where would I even begin? Or Africa, or Europe, well, where would I even begin? And with Azure, the answer is, you go to you click, you change your ARM template, you deploy it, and all of a sudden you're running anywhere in the planet. Your software is running with very low latency to a set of customers. If it turns out there's higher latency than needed, then you'll almost certainly now find an Azure Stack being delivered by a service provider in that area. So it really does provide planetary scale infrastructure for you to take advantage of and run your application as close to, and look, here's the thing, latency is the one thing you cannot negotiate with. So you want your application to be as close to the customer as possible.
So the other big aspect of ecosystem that you get with Azure Stack is the marketplace and support for software that runs in Azure, all being able to run in Azure Stack. And so this is just a subset, some examples here of some of the software that you get access to when you go to Azure Stack. For example, we've got Docker there and Chef. Those are the extensions for virtual machines. Those are available in Azure Stack. If you take a look at Pivotal Cloud Foundry and open source Cloud Foundry, those are available to operate in Azure Stack the same way that they operate in public Azure. Kubernetes works in Azure Stack as part of Azure Container Service. Also, you can take off-the-shelf Kubernetes as well. And you can see some of the companies that have worked with us as extensions for things like antivirus and backup that you might want to bring into Azure Stack. This is all part of the Azure ecosystem, so if you don't have to go and have a private cloud deployment that doesn't have those services from those vendors in it, as you would with a bespoke cloud. Here, you can take advantage of solutions that go up into the Azure Marketplace that are targeted also at Azure Stack compatibility. And this is one of the things that we're focused on with our ISVs, is showing them this opportunity that's going to be, we think, quite significant if they develop solutions that are targeted at the consistent API surface between Azure and Azure Stack. It allows them to very easily sell their solutions into enterprises that want to take advantage of them on premises the same way they take advantage of them up in the public cloud. And it is those ISVs, I think, that will have an advantage over the ones that do not take advantage, do not go after that opportunity. Because as you're looking to make choices, you're probably going to say, you know what, I'd like something that I can use the same in both Azure and Azure Stack.
You should make the point about the employers and employees. And then I want to talk about consistency.
Why don't you make that point?
I will. Senior moment there? Okay. So,
I thought I had made the point earlier, but you can go ahead and
well,
give it your own spin as you.
The great thing is that, yeah, now you can put these skills on your resume. I know Azure, and you knock on 10 doors, and many of them are going to open. Like, I know exactly what that is. If you put on your resume, hey, I've got 5 years of Acme private cloud experience, who's going to hire that person, right? As an employer, you want to hire somebody, all of a sudden, because you're using standardized stuff, you can hire them and have them be productive from the get-go versus hire them and then have to put them through training. So it really helps. I mean, this is the thing Microsoft does well, is create an ecosystem whereby employers and employees benefit economically. Now, here's something that I really want to kind of nail, because we made some controversial decisions in Azure Stack. We're not going to unwind those controversial decisions, and so I'll explain the theory behind it. The most important value proposition here is consistency with Azure, consistent with the Azure. That is not a point-in-time statement. That is a point across time. Okay, so we are going to be consistent, we're going to get consistent, and then we're going to stay consistent. Now, what that means is I cannot allow anything to ever get in the way of allowing an Azure Stack to be upgraded to the next version of Azure. Now, having been the lead architect for Windows Server for many years, I had lots of conversations along the lines of this. Hey, I love that new version of the operating system, but I can't upgrade to it. Oh, why can't you upgrade to it? Number one, well, you see, I use this third-party software, and they haven't supported that new version yet, so I can't upgrade. Or, number two, well, I can't upgrade because I use this third-party software, and they are available on the new operating system, but they want to charge a full relicensing fee, and I can't afford it. It doesn't make economic sense, so I'm not going to get to the next version of the OS. Or very, very, very frequently, I heard, I would love to use the new OS, but I use this third-party software, and they're out of business. I will never move to a new version of the operating system. And so these were all conversations I had quite a bit. So in that regard, what we decided was that we were going to have a fully integrated system and that we were going to enforce strict layering, that Azure Stack talks to the hardware, which is well defined with our hardware partners, that there are no third-party agents in that software. The only software that runs on those systems is a software that we allow, and that's at the infrastructure layer. At the tenant layer, you can do anything you want. And by this arrangement of having the sealed host, just like Azure has, they have a sealed host. If you went to Mark and said, hey Mark, I got this great management agent I'd love to run on your hardware, your answer would be? No. Thank you. No, in the same regard, right? Because he'd have exactly the same thing. One, it wouldn't work for security, but more importantly, it wouldn't allow him the freedom to be able to upgrade as quickly as possible. So that is the theoretical basis why, when you take a look at Azure Stack, and why I made this point, it's not do-it-yourself hardware, right? Not do-it-yourself infrastructure. It is sealed host, it's an integrated system. It's like an appliance. You plug it in and you get self-service IaaS, PaaS, and solutions. You don't open up the details and say, hey, what about this, what about that, what about this? I'd like to, my opinion is we should have one of these. So that's the theoretical basis. Great. So again, one of the benefits we mentioned was the fact that Azure has planetary scale infrastructure, and that now we're going to leverage service providers and managed service providers to be able to take these and provide it everywhere. Okay? So here's an example of a number of people who have already purchased systems in the United States, United Kingdom, Switzerland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Netherlands, New Zealand. You can today go talk to these people and arrange to be able to find out when they're go live with their public Azure Stack implementations and be able to take an Azure application and run it on somebody else's data center. So yeah, you might want to say, oh, I'll buy an Azure Stack myself and run my software there. But you might say, hey, I'd love to run my software in Finland, and you go talk to these guys, Telia, and they'll run it for you. So the role of these management service providers, of course they provide geographic location and access to provide you low latency access to your customers. But in addition to this, they provide expertise and consulting, right? They understand the markets, they understand the regulations, they understand domain expertise, and they can help you in the guidance and deployment of your services in those environments. And then they'll also manage and operate Azure Stack on your behalf. So just as when you buy Azure Stack, you operate it and run it yourself. When you get public cloud, you don't do that. Mark does that for you. If you use a service provider, again, you won't have to do that. The service provider will do that work for you. We mentioned that there's an integrated delivery experience, so let's talk about what that is. We are delivering integrated systems from Cisco, Dell EMC, HP Enterprise, Lenovo, and then later you'll see Huawei and Wortmann. Now, how does this work? It's an integrated solution. Sort of literally what you do is you pick a vendor and you pick a capacity. 4, 8, 12 servers. Okay? And then that's it. Right? There's a few more details about this disk configuration, that disk configuration, but not many. And then what they will do is they will come to your site, they'll fill out some details, they'll deploy it, they'll install it, and within a work week, you'll have of it showing up on the dock, you'll be up and running, delivering these integrated self-service IaaS and PaaS and solutions, right? So it's very quick to deploy. So again, of those people who have private clouds, could anyone raise their hand who got it up and running in less than a week? Yeah, none. Up and running in less than a quarter. Half a year, right. You see my point. Oh, yeah, a year? I bet we should talk. Most people don't. It takes a very long time to get these private clouds up and running. But with this being an integrated solution, it'll show up on your dock, and within a work week, boom, your customers are using it. Fantastic. Okay? Also decreases your risk of failure, right? Spend all this money, a year later it's still not working. That's a tough review conversation. You're not going to have a tough review conversation with this. Now, again, it is wherever we can, we are the same as Azure. So, how do you pay for Azure Stack? The same as Azure. If you use Azure, you pay for it. If you use more Azure, you pay more. And if you stop using it, you stop paying it. For the software, it's exactly the same model for Azure Stack. With Azure Stack, you purchase the hardware. Some of our hardware providers are also providing a kind of pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-use model, so that's great. That's fully the cloud model. But typically, you'll buy the hardware, and then the software you pay as you use. Okay? So if you're done with that VM at night, turn it off so you stop paying for it. Turn it on in the morning. You also, this will be generating billing records, and you'll get one Azure bill, so an integrated bill. Whether it's Azure Stack or Azure, you get a single integrated bill. Now, there are scenarios where people don't want that and want to have a normalized bill. They want to, for budgeting, or they don't want information disclosure, think governments. We have something we call the capacity buyout. So you say, okay, you have this many servers, here's how much it is per year. And then lastly here, we have integrated support. Integrated support basically means this. You have a problem, any problem, hardware, software, you call whoever you like. Whoever you lost talk to and you like them, call them, whether it's Microsoft or your hardware supplier. We have our support systems fully integrated. Whoever you call, we will address that problem from the beginning to the end. We have to work with the other party behind the scenes, we'll do that behind the scenes. We'll take care of you 100%. And that's what we said.
All right, so let's talk about the Azure Stack use cases. And there's really 3 use cases. I'm going to go into some detail on these. One of them is edge and disconnected solutions. One's where you've got something where you want it to be running, it needs to, there's a latency issue, or issue where you can't depend on internet connectivity being up 100%, where the loss of that might cost you a lot of money. The second is that you want a consistent cloud application development model that can meet regulatory requirements. So I've already talked about this one a few times, which is Azure Stack meeting regulations that public Azure just currently doesn't meet. And then finally, the other one is cloud application model that extends from public cloud down to on-premises. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at these. The first one here is the edge and disconnected case. And actually, we launched Azure Stack kind of thinking this is the hybrid cloud, consistent hybrid cloud play. This is going to be for enterprises that want Azure Stack inside their own data centers for the reasons we talked about, but then can move to Azure. And as we started to talk to customers, we started to hear back loudly and clearly this use case, which we hadn't really anticipated, and that is edge. For example, in manufacturing, looking at many of our customers that are manufacturing want Azure Stack sitting on a factory floor right next to the factory floor, the automation line, getting telemetry from it, processing it, and doing kind of semi-real-time feedback into the factory. They can't afford for that system to be running up in Azure because there's a bandwidth issue. There's so much data being spit out from these systems that can't make it all the way to the public cloud through a thin pipe. And the second problem is you lose the internet connection to the public cloud, and now your factory stops. That could literally cost millions of dollars an hour in lost revenue.
And you lose control of your robots. You never want to lose control of your robots. If there's any confusion on this, please rewatch the Terminator series. You never want to lose control of your robots.
So it's not just factory floor. I've got some other concrete examples from customers where they're using Azure Stack in this edge and disconnected way. In fact, even if the whole world moved to public cloud, got off their on-premises data centers, this scenario endures because the public cloud just cannot reach from a bandwidth and latency and connectivity constraint all the way to all the places where you want computing. Factory floor is one. Hospital's another one. Cruise ship's another one. And the list goes on of places where you want something that's like cloud, but can't depend on the public cloud. The next,
actually, we just had the hurricanes here, and a bunch of hospitals. Hospitals have their own emergency generators, but they might have been disconnected from the internet. There was a lot of devastation to the infrastructure. So the ability to be able to keep things up and running in a hospital makes perfect sense.
Now this next one, like I said, we've already talked about this one. The need for meet regulatory requirements that aren't met by the public cloud. This is another great use case for Azure Stack. And then I've got an example of showing you just one of those scenarios and how it might look with Azure Stack in the mix. How many people have heard of blockchain? So this is this new, it's kind of reached the peak of the hype cycle here. It's basically blockchain's the answer. What's the question? Kind of moment that we're in right now. And what I've got set up as a demonstration for you here is a blockchain Ethereum network with multiple nodes representing a very real scenario that many of our financial customers, for example, have, which is they're creating a consortium Ethereum blockchain network. Some of the banks are running on-prem and want their nodes on-prem in their own data centers, meeting certain regulations. Other ones are okay having their nodes running up in the public cloud. So a perfect scenario for Azure Stack and Azure, where you can take a blockchain template, and I've got a template here. Let me switch to number 8. This blockchain resource manager template will deploy a number of mining nodes and transaction nodes for Ethereum into a target Azure system. We can take this same template, point it at public Azure, and take it then and point it at Azure Stack and deploy our mining nodes. So one of those consortium members can target whatever environment meets their needs. We've already got this deployed into 2 Azure Stack systems, one in Orlando, another one in Redmond, and I'm showing you the Azure Stack portal. Here you can see that this is the Orlando Azure Stack management interface, and then here's the Redmond one. If you drill into the resource manager groups that I've got deployed on this Azure Stack, you can see I've just got one resource group here, and this is the Ethereum nodes that I talked about. 4 VMs down here. 2 of them are mining nodes. Those M's indicate those, and then 2 of them are transaction nodes that you see right here for high availability. The same, if we drill into this one, you're going to see the exact same thing, whoops, as I mentioned, because this is running the exact same template. So as this comes up, you can see this looks the same thing. 2 mining nodes, 2 transaction nodes. I've got Ethereum management interfaces now pointing at each of those deployments. So this is what a consortium member would see. This is consortium member ID 1. This is consortium member ID 0. One of them is pointing at the Redmond blockchain nodes, and the other one's pointing at the Orlando blockchain nodes. And you can see now, let me do a reload just to sync these up, the number of blocks that have been mined on these things. I'm going to force the execution of another block by transferring a certain amount of Ether from one account to another one. And if I reload now,
you transferred Ether?
There it goes. There's the block that's just been mined. Yeah, transferred Ether, right?
Wow. Is that like a qubit? Anybody follow that? Oh, this guy. Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions.
All right. Here you can see, okay, just disregard him. Here you can see that we've got the exact same number of nodes, blocks mined in both of those systems now, because this is part of a network that's communicating across Azure Stacks to mine those nodes and then update the chain. So that's an example there of, I want to switch back to the slideshow, of the case where you're needing to meet regulatory requirements, and you can do it with Azure Stack and Azure in a consistent way. And the final one is that many of our customers, as they're making this shift towards the public cloud, they want to standardize on a consistent DevOps and application model across both of them. So modernizing in place on premises, modernizing in the cloud, having geoscale applications, having one way for the developers to do DevOps across them and develop applications for them. And that's a very common use case that we see that Azure Stack can be a key part of.
Yeah, and this is typically within the design pattern world we call the strangler pattern, where you have a system, say a legacy mainframe or a legacy Oracle system that you want to get off of, but you can't. So what you do is you put a modern front end in front of it, and then step by step, and it modern front end that talks to the back end. Originally, at the beginning, that front end is thin, and then iteration after iteration, you make it larger and larger, and then ultimately strangle the back end. And once you've done that, then you can decide where you want the various parts to run. You want to run them in the back end, you want to run them in the public cloud, et cetera. So that's the pattern we see.
Now, we already have some customers that are adopting Azure Stack for each of these different use cases, and I'll just speak briefly about a few of them here. The bottom left corner, that is Avid. Avid is a company that makes media processing software. They've actually been part of many award-winning films, has been built on or designed on top of their software. And they're creating what they consider the newsroom of the future. So the situation is that many newsrooms, they are in charge of their own production. And they're collecting video from the field reporters. Well, to broadcast and process the video for their local customers, they can't rely on the public cloud because of latency, and so and the bandwidth that they've got to process. So what they're doing is uploading that video up into the public cloud using Azure Media Services to do transformations on it and do closed captioning on it, and then they're downloading that video onto Azure Stack, and that's in their studios, and then broadcasting that to their local customer base. So the Avid software supports that full life cycle that allows these newsrooms now to process video in a much more efficient way than they have been, in a much more consistent way than they have been up to this point in time. In the next column, this regulatory requirement, Saxo Bank. Saxo Bank is a Danish bank that has software that allows their customers to perform financial transactions across global markets. They've got to meet regulatory requirements and data sovereignty requirements, and so they're building their next generation software platform on top of Azure Stack that lets them have the flexibility to go place the software wherever they need to and future-proof it for when they might be able to move it up into the public cloud. And then the final column, Mitsui Knowledge Industry. This is the system integrator for Mitsui Group, one of the largest conglomerates in Japan. And they're in charge of basically the digital transformation strategy for all of the conglomerate companies. And what they want to do is have a standard way for those companies to be able to develop and deploy software. And what they realized is that some of those companies, and maybe even within a company, will have different requirements for different pieces of software. Some can run in the public cloud, some might have to run on premises, some might even be running on factory floors like we talked about earlier. But by having a common tool chain and IT systems that support that wherever they want to run and operate that software, they can streamline all of their businesses. And so they're adopting Azure Stack as part of that hybrid application consistent model for their conglomerate companies.
Great. So let's drill into some of the details here. So here we have the Azure Stack on the left and Azure on the right. And you see these stacks are very similar, right? In fact, they are compatible. They're consistent, right? So there's two ways, let's put our architect's hat on. There are two ways to achieve consistency. Way number one is compatible. The definition of compatible is different. The other way to get consistency is the same. Wherever possible, we are consistent because we are the same. We use the same code. And at the top layers of Stack, we are the same. At the bottom layers, we are compatible. We are the same portal. It's exactly the same code in the Azure and Azure Stack portals. The only difference is in Azure Stack, it says Azure Stack. Okay? It is the same PowerShell tools. It is the same DevOps tools. You're able to take Visual Studio, point it at Azure, able to take exactly the same tool, point it at Azure Stack. It works without any change. The Azure Resource Manager. This is sort of the heart of things, right? When you saw that template that Mark was talking about, that was the Azure Resource Manager template. It defines all the resources, the configurations, and how they should be put together. This is the same code across Azure and Azure Stack. Now when it comes to IaaS and PaaS, again, the same code. Now here it is a subset of the code, but it is the same code. And then when we get to the infrastructure is where we have some variation, right? And the reason for that is that Azure has a very large design center, and that is not the case for Azure Stack. With Azure Stack, we want to be able to start with 4 servers. I think the minimal stamp size for Azure at the time was 800 nodes, right?
That's just for one of the services, like storage.
One of the services, 800 nodes. Anybody want to do a proof of concept with 800 nodes? Right, so that's why we had to be compatible. And so when I was architect of Windows Server, we worked with Mark to say, hey, how do we have cloud-inspired, software-defined, compatible infrastructure in Windows Server itself? And so that's what we're using there, software-defined networking and the software-defined storage stacks.
So let's talk about the services that are initially going to be available on Azure Stack and some of the services that are coming. This really represents the first wave of PaaS services that are going to be available. Some of these are available today at GA, and some of them are already coming in early FY18 or CY18 next year. Azure App Service. This is PaaS for web applications. How many people have deployed a web app onto Azure App Service? So quite a few of you. Same exact code running here on premises that allows you, or in Azure Stack, that allows you to deploy those web apps directly to it, as well as the mobile and API apps. Azure Functions. This is the future of cloud computing, serverless it's called, where you don't worry about the infrastructure at all. You focus just solely on the code, and you deploy the code. It gets executed in the response to certain events, and it runs only for that time that it needs to run and then goes away. You don't worry about scaling. You don't worry about the servers underneath or the virtual machines underneath or patching anything. Purely focus on code. This is the way developers can get their jobs done very quickly and very efficiently. And that's available on Azure Stack as well. Service Fabric, a microservices application platform that we built much of Azure on top of, that is going to be available as a service like it is in public Azure early next year. But you can still now deploy Service Fabric applications directly onto Azure Stack because Service Fabric supports deployment into on-premises environments, even bare metal servers or virtual machines or even other clouds. So by definition, anything that supports infrastructure as a service, anything that you can deploy into virtual machines, you can deploy into Azure Stack. So for the short term, that's one way to get Service Fabric there. And then Azure Container Service. This is our containers as a service that includes support for 3 orchestration engines, Kubernetes, Mesos DCOS, and Docker Swarm. That will be available as a service offering early next year. For now, you can take the Azure Resource Manager templates that are used by Azure Container Service in public Azure and deploy them down to Azure Stack. So you can take those templates and deploy a Kubernetes cluster, for example, onto Azure Stack today. And then finally, Cloud Foundry has said that they're going to support Azure Stack. As we mentioned earlier, Pivotal Cloud Foundry, you can also take open source Cloud Foundry and deploy that into Azure Stack. So that's a look at platform as a service that's initially going to be offered. Now, Jeffrey talked about the motivation, like why do we pick these services? Basically, we're picking the core services for any modern application and targeting those. Then we're going to be listening to feedback from customers and see which ones are missing from the core scenarios that you want to light up, and then prioritizing those. And there's a list of services that are going to be coming next year that we're not ready to talk about, but the short story is that this is by no means the complete Azure Stack story. We're going to be fleshing out Azure Stack with a lot more PaaS services. And you can think of one of the key scenarios that we want to fully enable end-to-end with PaaS, and that is IoT Edge. So if you take a look at IoT in Azure, you can kind of get an idea for the services that we're prioritizing there. And then infrastructure as a service. Well, infrastructure as a service in Azure is just more than simply a virtual machine. It's kind of virtual machines plus plus. For example, we've got virtual machine scale sets, which are our scale-out virtual machines that allow you to very efficiently create a cluster that you might want to put a microservices or container orchestration platform on top of. And that is available in Azure Stack, as well as the features that are being pushed into virtual machines and virtual machine scale sets, like the metadata service. That will be part of Azure Stack as well. So this is aiming at true consistency for the enhanced virtual machine infrastructure that we've got in Azure. You can see containers with Docker. I already talked about container orchestration engines, but of course, if you've got Linux or Windows, you support containers on Azure Stack. Networking, this is a key place where we are sharing as much as we can. So the software load balancer that operates in public Azure also operates in Azure Stack, as well as the network gateway and the virtual networking services. Azure Storage, blobs, tables, and queues are available. And then Key Vault, finally, the key management service. That's also available in Azure Stack, so you can securely store your secrets inside of it.
Right, so let's drill into this idea of the integrated systems. Okay, so here is a detailed block diagram of the internals, and the key thing I want to highlight here is internals are internal, right? We're not going to go into the internals with you. It is a black box.
The reason that Jeffrey's got this like this is because he doesn't really understand the internals.
Okay. Snap. Okay, wasn't expecting that. So we're not going to drill into the details because, again, this is about an integrated system that's going to be delivered to you as an application or an appliance that then you use, okay? Now, these are what some of the systems look like. Again, you're going to pick a vendor and you're going to pick a capacity. Dell, 4 systems, HP, 8, Lenovo, 12. That's the sort of conversation you're going to have, right? And when I say that these are integrated systems, I really mean they're fully integrated, and that's integrated across the entire life cycle, okay? So we worked with the hardware vendors to architect and design these systems for the requirements of Azure Stack. We handled the deployment, the provisioning, the configuration of these systems. We do all the validation of these systems, so they don't just come in, plug it in, and leave. They come in, plug it in, integrate it into your environment, and validate that it works up in your environment. We are going to be providing monitoring and diagnostics of the system. If a system, when a component breaks, we do the field replacement for that, of that component for you. We do the integrated patching and updating of the system. We know the system, we understand the system, so we're able to apply patches in a context-sensitive way to minimize the maintenance windows and any disruption of the tenant space. We will also provide business continuity, and we have rock-solid security and privacy. And I encourage you tomorrow, Filippo and I are going to give a talk about that. It's an area I'm particularly passionate around because really it was Azure Stack that transformed me from a security pessimist, thinking that we were never going to turn the corner on security, into a security optimist. The way we've approached security in Azure Stack has really just kind of transformational. I've become quite optimistic about security. So look for that session tomorrow. The point I want to make here is, again, we manage the entire life cycle. We provide for that entire life cycle so that you can use the system versus spend your time and energy trying to create and run the system. So how is this going to get integrated into your environment? Charlie, you should be coming up here. Charlie's going to give us a demo. But basically, and by the way, when I say an integrated system, I don't just mean the servers, right? You're going to have servers, but it also comes with 3 top-of-rack switches, right? 2 for redundancy and 1 for management. And so basically, you're going to have these scale units. And then, again, think of this as a black box, Azure Stack. What you're going to do is you're going to plug this into your space, power, and cooling. You're going to plug it into your identity integration, Active Directory or AAD. And then you don't deal with the individual components of the system. You view the whole thing as a single component. Right? So at some point you'll say, wait a second here, I've got security things that I need to do, I have management things that I need to do, how am I going to do those? And the answer is, we will provide an aggregate endpoint for you to talk to, for your monitoring systems to talk to, and your security systems to talk to. So we will work with your security and monitoring systems, but they will see Azure Stack as a component, not our internals. We're not going to be publishing the details of our internals. And then again, hook it up to the network board device. So at that point, this is how you integrate it in. We have an Excel spreadsheet We give to you, you fill out all that information, you give that to your hardware vendor, they come in, configure it for you, Bob's your uncle. And with that, let me introduce you to Charlie. Charlie's going to talk to you about the Azure Stack Operator. Now the point I want to make here is that, which one, 7? 7. Is that using Azure Stack, roles and responsibilities change. And you have some new roles and responsibilities. And the great thing is, these are great jobs. One of them is the Azure Architect, the person that's going to help figure out how to size the system, how to integrate it into all of your environments, your monitoring security environments. Then there is the Azure Stack Operator. And here we're going to drill into the roles and responsibilities of an Azure Stack Operator.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Hi, I'm Charlie Satterfield. I'm a program manager on the Azure Stack engineering team, responsible for the infrastructure management and monitoring solutions. So Azure Stack is designed to be managed as an appliance. And with the launch of Azure Stack, as Jeffrey mentioned, we're introducing the Azure Stack Operator. That person is responsible for configuring, managing, monitoring, and updating their Azure Stack regions. Now, the Azure Stack Operator is responsible for configuring the system to make sure that they have the right artifacts in each of the regions to serve their customers. By artifacts, I'm talking about the VM images and the VM extensions, as well as the PaaS RPs that their customers desire. They're also responsible for reacting to and taking action to resolve alerts that indicate when an issue may be present in their Azure Stack region. They're also responsible for updating each of their Azure Stack regions. Now, let's go through each of those operations. They're recurring tasks that the operator may have to take.
Yes, please.
All right, so in terms of ensuring that you have the right content, we actually make that very easy for you. In the past, you may have to manage creating and updating your VM images, and it's kind of an ordeal to manage.
Very expensive, very hard to do, yeah.
All right, so with marketplace management, in my Redmond region, I've actually downloaded quite a few VM images and extensions. We make this very easy because we're actually syndicating content from Azure. So I've already configured a bunch of images here that my customers have requested, but I have a new request that I need to configure. Somebody's requested the ability to stand up their own Chef server. All right, and so I click Add from Azure, and you can see I've got a large list of content.
So let's make sure we got this right. So now this is an Azure Stack portal, and it's connected up to Public Cloud Azure.
Yes.
Public Cloud Azure has the Chef thing, and you're going to bring that down and make it available to your customers.
Yes.
There you go.
Exactly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and search for it here. So let me go ahead and download this Chef package. I can actually read the details on what the licensing requirements are for this, the version. I've clicked download it, and I get an indication now that the downloading has started.
And now this also includes the OS images, correct?
Yes.
So a while ago, you've heard about this thing called Petya and WannaCry. And so what we did was we updated the Azure Stack images to remove by default the SMB1 components that expose this capability. And so now you'll just download those images, and your customers using those images are going to be safe and secure, and you didn't have to do anything other than download it. You take advantage of the work we're doing to keep those images well preserved and well up to date.
All right, so while this is downloading, let's take a look at some other things, but it's worth noting, as soon as it's finished downloading, your customers can start using this through the Azure Stack Marketplace. All right, so one of the other things I mentioned was, as the operator, I'm responsible for reacting to alerts. And in the Azure Stack admin portal, I have an alerts tile pinned to the default dashboard. By selecting that alerts tile, I can navigate to the alert list. In this case, I can see I do have an alert in this region, in the Redmond region. I've lost connectivity with one of my physical disks. It's a warning alert. I don't need to take action on it right away, but what I would do is go contact my OEM to request a new disk, and once that disk is put in, this alert will resolve itself.
And it's worth noting the difference between this and kind of the traditional operating system experience, right? Traditional operating system experience, we give you the event log, right? That and a rabbit's foot. Best of luck, my friend. You know, just monitor that thing and figure it out. Here, that's not the model. We explicitly said that's not the model. Here, it's all action-oriented, right? It's like driving a car. You drive a car, a light comes on, so put gas in. Put gas in, you're happy. Drive a car, light comes on, put the air in the tires. You put air in the tires. Or a light comes on and says, call the mechanic, buddy, you need some help. Exactly the same model here. You know, you're not going to have to be looking here, there. A light's going to come on and says, hey, reseat this disk, and if it doesn't work, contact the hardware vendor. Light's going to come on and says, hey, restart these services, etc. And many times the light will come on and say, call customer support. But that's the model.
All right. So you can see we only had one alert in the Redmond region, and I really don't have any other action to take because the actions are derived from the alerts that I see in the system. So I could browse the web or check my email. So let me look at my email. I actually have another alert that I need to deal with. So I'm monitoring both my Redmond region and my Orlando region with System Center Operations Manager. We have a management pack specifically for monitoring Azure Stack. It discovers each region independently and surfaces those alerts within Operations Manager, and then can feed on into your existing ITSM notification system, whether that be through a ticketing system or directly through email or pager service. In this case, I forwarded it on to email. So within this email, I can see that it's my Orlando region that's having an issue, and it's actually, I have an infrastructure role instance, ORAZS CA01, that is unavailable. So I need to take action to go resolve this alert. So let me go back into the portal. Let me navigate to the Orlando instance. So in Orlando, I actually have two alerts here. One of them's been around for a little while, and that one is the public IP address utilization alert. Apparently, I'm running a little low on public IPs, but I'll get to that later. Let me take a look at this infrastructure role instance unavailable alert. All right, so within this alert, I get the name of the alert, the severity, it's warning. I don't necessarily have to take action right now, but to make the demo lively, we should really take action on this. Looking at this in the remediation, it tells me that I have to navigate within the portal, and then I have to attempt to start or restart this infrastructure role instance. So we actually have context links within each of the alerts that will take you directly to the blade you need to take action on, so that you're not hunting and pecking around trying to find where to go. Yep. So if I navigate to this, I go right to ORAZS CA01. I can see that its status is stopped. So I could go ahead and click Start, and it would start right up. Now, as an Azure Stack operator, I also want to try and make my life easy. And so if I'm going to do that, why wouldn't I want to automate this in, what should I automate in it?
Sysmon, does that help? Can I do that in Sysmon? Not for automation. Maybe PowerShell. Give that a try.
Yes, let's try PowerShell. So I actually
wow.
Yes.
Wow.
All right.
That's beautiful.
So I have a PowerShell session already active. I've already logged in into the Orlando environment. Let me check and just make sure that alert is still active. So let me go ahead and run. And this should return, yep, there are the two alerts I've got. That infrastructure role instance is still stopped. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to power that on with the invoke AZS infra role instance power on function. All right. So that's going to power on. It's going to take a few minutes before this alert resolves itself, but assuming it does power on successfully, the alert will resolve itself. Now let's look at that last area that we talked about, which is updating Azure Stack. Now, I get notifications from my OEMs as well as Microsoft when updates are available for Azure Stack. With our GA product, you have to download those images and then upload them into your Azure Stack local storage accounts. Now, I've already uploaded one of our updates into the local storage, so it actually shows up here with an update available. So if I navigate into the update blade, I can see, as soon as it resolves, I do have an update and it's ready to be applied. It's showing me the prerequisite as far as the version that's required. And then I have a support path which should link to the documentation regarding that update, what's contained in the update, those sorts of details. So if I go ahead and select it, in just a moment, I should be able to hit the Update Now button. Once I hit the Update Now button, yep, it's available, we will start the update application process, and we will go through updating all the bits on Azure Stack, from the drivers to the Windows OS on the nodes to all the Azure components that live in the infrastructure. And we'll handle migration of workloads from one node to another. Now, we do recommend that you have a maintenance window during your updates, because there is the potential of some intermittent downtime during that process. But if you'd like to learn more about the updates, I know Justin actually has been presenting a session right now, but he has another session later this week that goes into detail, a lot of detail, about the whole update process.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Jeff.
So before we switch back to the deck, I thought I'd show you Mark's desktop. Look at this. He's got TweetDeck open, monitoring references to himself and watching cat videos. So just saying.
Hey, Jeffrey was up here mesmerized by that cat video.
I was. That was a great cat. Did we do the right one? Is it 6? 5? Okay, so now, I mentioned to you that there are new roles and responsibilities. Today we announced that we have a new Azure Stack operator training course and a certification exam. So you get certified to understand how to run Azure Stack. So again, there's two ways you can get Azure Stack. First is as an integrated system. You buy the hardware, you deploy this up and running. But you can also get it as a fully managed service, right? So the service providers will do the management and the provisioning for you. There's a single point of contact, and you can get it either way. I'm going to go a little bit fast. Oh, actually, we're at the recap.
Yep. Well, actually, do you want to recap the digital transformation stuff?
I will.
All right.
As a matter of fact. Yeah, okay, so the roadmap here. In July, we delivered the Azure Stack software development kit. You can download that. That's a one-node system. It's a beefy one-node system, but you can run Azure Stack on that for development purposes. And the integrated systems were available for order. Now, those integrated systems are starting to ship. They're shipping in 46 countries. The rest of the year, we're going to be focused in on building out our supply chain volume and optimizing availability and reliability. And then next year, we're really going to focus in on scale, right? So at some point, we'll have, we'll certainly be able to scale up to 16 servers per scale unit. We'll look at multi-region and multi-scale sets within those. We'll be supporting new VM types, managed disks, and of course, high priority to get both Service Fabric and Container as a Service delivered as services. And just, basically the way that works is, Mark's and his PMs and me and my PMs, we get together and say, what are you hearing from the customers? What are the most important scenarios? And it's not so much this feature or that feature, but what scenario do we want to light up? And then we jointly plan how to bring those new capabilities to market. So again, the heart of this talk is Azure Stack is not a separate thing from Azure. Azure is the thing that enables customers' digital transformation, and Azure Stack extends Azure to a new set of customers and a new set of scenarios. So again, how do you think about Azure Stack? You want to think about it as the first and only product in a new category, a hybrid cloud. It's not virtualization. It is an integrated system focused in on delivering self-service IaaS, PaaS, and cloud solutions. It's not a DIY infrastructure play. We are going to keep this up to date with Azure, and you'll have a choice of when to update, not if to update. If you don't keep up to date after 3 months, you will be out of support. So it's not something you can deploy and forget. And it is a fully open system. Again, the sea refuses no river. If you want to be pure Linux, we will support you. If you want to be pure Windows, we will support you. And if you want to support both, we will support you. We'll do whatever is required to make you successful, and they'll all run great. So how do you get going with Azure Stack?
Well, first, you can start developing applications for Azure Stack by developing them in Azure. The next is to get the Azure Stack Development Kit, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then finally, order Azure Stack itself. Now, as far as getting started here on site with Azure Stack, over in the Immersion Center, the Immersion Zone over at the Hyatt Regency, we've got Azure Stack Development Kit up there and running, so you can go down there and start playing with Azure Stack directly. By the way, the Azure Stack Development Kits that you'll be playing with are actually running in Azure. Requires about a minimum of 96 gigs of memory, but we've got virtual machine sizes that go much larger than that. And using nested virtualization, we're able to install all the virtual machines that make up Azure Stack inside of an Azure virtual machine itself for you to play with. Finally, the other thing that you can do is actually, we're going to have a kind of hands-on online lab for Azure Stack. And you can get free credits for that if you stop by the expo area and stop by the Azure Stack booth. We're handing them out there, so you can go get free credits to start playing with that online training for Azure Stack.
Great. And so if you have feedback, this is how you give us feedback on Azure Stack. And with that, that concludes our talk. Oh, actually, one more thing. We have, yeah, you were here. We have 27 sessions on Azure Stack. So guess what? We are all in on Azure Stack. We hope this has been a good use of your time, and thank you very much. Have a great Ignite.